Moving right along with part 2, which is going to be section 47 from the Doctrine and Covenants as we know it today. We'll start right in with a paper's introduction to section 47. The earliest copy we get is from Revelation Book 1. It is in the handwriting of John Whitmer. It is termed the 50th Commandment. Now, what might be interesting about this is that section 48 is the 49th commandment. So Revelation book has this in a different order. So section 48 comes first and section 47 comes next. And with even the Book of Commandments and the Doctrine and Covenants, they're just not in the same order that we have them as today. So just so that you know, in reality, these things are flipped. But for the sake of the chronology of it, the Doctrine or the Documents Volume 1 actually states that these are put in this order chronologically when they were originally received. So the chronology of what we get is not always based on what we get out of Revelation Book 1. So there you go. We're a little out of order here, but it's apparently it actually does track. So there is some interesting things here. There's actually a main strike through on the introduction text to this page that says, in consequence of not feeling reconciled to right at the request of Joseph without a commandment, etc. I find it interesting that was sort of crossed out. And there's also, the text reads here, wherefore it shall be given by the Comforter to write these things, and the superscript is, in him inasmuch as he is faithful. And that's the handwriting of Joseph Smith, or of John Whitmer, excuse me. So there's a couple of interesting things right off the bat that you see in Revelation Book 1. Some strike-throughs, some superscripts that show up there. So some grammatical changes. In this case, it's mostly in sort of the introduction portion of it, as well as a few things, because again, it is a very short section of the Doctrine and Covenants. Chapter 50 is what we see in the Book of Commandments for this. So section 47 is the same as chapter 50. And this section is section 63 in the Doctrine and Covenants, so towards the back of that book. We also get a copy in John Whitmer's history, which we very well should, because it is directed to him. So this is a revelation to John Whitmer, and so John Whitmer's history has a few things. We'll read into that in a moment. There's also one in the manuscript history and a copy in the Evening and Morning Star, along with many of the other revelations that we had previous to the Book of Commandments. There are some differences between 1981 and 2013 section headings here, and this is not a huge difference, but I think something that's significant enough. So here's from 1981. It reads, prior to this time, Oliver Cowdery had acted as church historian and recorder. John Whitmer had not sought an appointment as historian, but being asked to serve in this capacity, he said that he would obey the will of the Lord in the matter. He had already served as a secretary to the prophet in recording many of the revelations received in Fayette, New York area. So, kind of positive. But 2013 gives us a different story. So it reads, John Whitmer, who had already served as a clerk to the prophet, initially hesitated when he was asked to serve as the church historian and recorder, replacing Oliver Cowdery. He wrote, I would rather not do it, but observed that the will of the Lord be done, and if he desires it, I desire that he would manifest it through Joseph the seer. After Joseph Smith received this revelation, John Whitmer accepted and served in his appointed office. So kind of an interesting, I don't see any chiding for this, but he's like, oh no, I'm not doing that job for you unless I get some official revelation for it. And now we have section 47. So there you go. Maybe call it stubborn or hesitant, whatever you want to call it. So some circumstances leading up to us. The introduction from Revelation Book 1 gives us this. 50th Commandment, March 8th, 1831. Given at Kirtland, Ohio. Given to John Whitmer in consequence of not feeling reconciled to right at the request of Joseph without a commandment, etc. For the record, that is John Whitmer's handwriting, writing that down. So he got to write his own, and that's what he wrote. He wrote his own introduction to his own revelation. The Book of Commandments, Doctrine and Covenants still don't offer very much, just revelation given to John Whitmer, March 8th, 1831. And then the manuscript history gives us a little more. It says, "The same day that I received the foregoing revelation, I also received the following, setting apart John Whitmer as a historian inasmuch as he was faithful." That's all you get. Very short. And the previous revelation in this case is, again, section 46. So there's a lot of revelations happening at the same time as the saints are gathering in Ohio. So what do we get out of John's own history? Well, he gives us this. And this is the beginning of chapter 6, as you can see here in Whitmer's history. He says, "I returned from Nelson, Ohio, where I and Lyman White had built a branch of the Church of Christ. I was appointed by the voice of the elders to keep the church record. Joseph Smith Jr. said unto me, 'You must also keep the church history.' I would rather not do it, but observed that the will of the Lord be done. And if he desires it, I desire that he would manifest it through Joseph the seer. And thus came the word of the Lord." So as you can see, the biggest difference between 1981 and 2013 is that the 1981 version gave us what was in the history of the church, the manuscript history of the church. And the 2013 has now added in John Whitmer's history language to this. So that is just one example of how the modern church has used the Joseph Smith Papers Project to kind of pull in and include a lot more documents outside of just the manuscript history for this. So little filling in the history there. Thank you, Latter-day Saint religion. Historical introduction to this from Documents Volume 1. A little lengthy, but it's got some interesting things in it. It says, "This revelation appointed John Whitmer to take up the work formerly done by Oliver Cowdery as scribe and recorder, and added a new responsibility. Cowdery, who was called to write for Joseph Smith by April 1829, was the principal scribe for the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith's early revelations, and, once the Church of Christ was organized in April 1830, kept minutes at meetings. He also served as scribe for early portions of Joseph Smith's inspired revision of the Bible. By the time of this revelation, however, Cowdery was away on a mission, and Whitmer had assumed some of Cowdery's former duties. He succeeded Cowdery as scribe for Joseph Smith's Bible revision and also assisted Joseph Smith in gathering and copying revelations, a work that culminated in the creation of a manuscript book of Revelations. Wink, wink, that is Revelation Book 1. The following revelation not only formalized Whitmer's assignment to assist my servant Joseph in such writing duties, but added that he should also, quote, write and keep a regular history, unquote. The revelation then reiterated this dual appointment, directing that Whitmer keep the church record and history continually, for Oliver I have appointed to an other office. Therefore, boys and girls, friends and enemies perhaps, yes, you have the Revelation Book 1 because of this section of the Doctrine and Covenants. So I think that's kind of fun. And a lot of the histories that we have, so John Whitmer's history, and I would say a lot of what we have, and I believe that this is the motto of the Church History Department, where we get all these books from, the Church History Press, is this idea that there shall be a record kept, right? And there shall be a history kept. Further to this, we get, before the establishment of the church, Joseph Smith's primary need for scribal assistance was for recording revelatory texts, as demonstrated by Cowdery's work on the translation of the Book of Mormon, as well as his careful recording of at least 16 revelations. The need for other kinds of record keeping increased once the Church of Christ was organized. The first lines of a revelation recorded on 6th of April 1830, the day of organization, proclaimed that, quote, there shall be a record be kept among you, unquote. And the church's foundational articles and covenants commanded that a record of members be kept and that members be provided with certificates of good standing that could be presented to the various branches of the church. Further to this, according to Whitmer's own history, when Joseph Smith told him that in addition to keeping church records, you must also keep the church history, he initially declined. I would rather not do it because He initially declined. I would rather not do it, but observed that the will of the Lord be done. And if he desires it, I desire that he would manifest it through Joseph the seer. As a result of this conversation, Joseph Smith dictated the revelation presented here. Whitmer likely composed its heading, when copying it into Revelation Book 1, acknowledging that the text was dictated, quote, in consequence, not feeling reconciled to write at the request of Joseph without a commandment, unquote. Prior to the dictation of this revelation, record keeping in the church was often sporadic and incomplete. After Whitmer was appointed church historian and recorder, the number of documents recording church history increased substantially. Minutes of church conferences generally contained more detail than they had previously, and Whitmer's creation of Revelation Book 1 preserved most of Joseph Smith's early revelations. Whitmer also wrote a 96-page narrative history that primarily described events from fall 1830 through the mid-1830s. And that is what we call the John Whitmer history, which I've been reading from. So this revelation is a huge floodgate in terms of understanding the history of these people, and is one of the main reasons why we have preserved all of the things that I have been reading to you and sharing with you for the last 4 months. So almost 5. Wow, believe that. All right, so some from the content and footnotes, not a whole lot here, but there is a text that reads, "Behold, it is expedient that my servant John should write and keep a regular history, and assist my servant Joseph in transcribing all things which shall be given him." Footnote 3 to this says, on 8th of March, 1831, or soon thereafter, John Whitmer began transcribing, that is, copying, Joseph Smith's translation of the Old Testament, while Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon moved on to the New Testament, as they had been commanded in a revelation dictated a short time before. And that's all we have for notes for that. So, a lot of really interesting and consequential things, substantial things from Revelations, from this particular section, 47. And John Whitmer becomes a major reason why we have any of this, why we can compare notes, and fortunately for you, why I can make a podcast called Filling in the History. So thank you, John Whitmer, for that. So that's that. Moving on to part 3, we're going to be talking about section 48, which again is a little out of order as it is in those records, but we'll deal with that here in part 3. So stay tuned.